Hi Darran, thank you. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Which was the idea behind your book Imaginary Cities?
My book came from a time when I was living in the city of Phnom Penh in Cambodia. So I was there helping out on a film about land grabbing and human rights abuses. So there was a big lake in the city that was taken over by the government, and all the families who lived there were kicked off their land, and a protest movement happened because of that. So I was there helping out on a film following those people, following their struggle. So it was all focused on the politics of cities. While I was there, I went for a drink one night with a friend of mine who's an architect, and we went to the top of this building called the Foreign Correspondence Club. And we were just having a drink, we were talking about architecture, and these huge storms started coming in, these thunderstorms started coming in off the plains towards the city. And it was rainy season in Cambodia at the time, and it rains so much that the actual river starts to flow backwards because there's so much rain. So I was sitting on top of this building thinking about the surroundings, seeing the thunderclouds coming in, seeing the river going backwards, thinking about the history of the place. So it used to be a French colonial capital. It was then a beautiful swinging 60s, really hip sort of place. And then the Khmer Rouge came and they emptied the city of 3 million people. So it was a ghost town for about 4 or 5 years. And I thought to myself, I just had this sudden revelation that the city that I was in was far stranger than any city I could imagine, any city in fiction. If you wrote down the story of Phnom Penh or any other city, it would be stranger than any city that we could invent. So that brought me back to one of my favorite books, which is Calvino's Invisible Cities. And I thought, I want to write a factual companion to Invisible Cities. What he did for fiction, I want to try and do for non-fiction.
Half of the people of the world live in urban or suburban places. What's their imaginary cities, in your opinion? Do they ever find it in reality?
It's a huge, big thing. I mean, we're seeing the biggest immigration or the biggest migration of people that has ever happened is happening right now, and it's primarily happening in China. The statistics are really crazy. There's figures that I've seen where they've poured more concrete in 5 years in China than America did in the 20th century. So it's almost unimaginable the scale of this urbanization. Now, my thoughts are always, what does this mean for the citizen? What does this mean for someone coming from a rural place into a city? Is it an intimidating experience? Do they find a community that they can relate to? So I'm always kind of trying to follow these people's journeys. I think one of the great things about cities is that every experience is subjective. So although we have a place called Turin, we have tens of thousands of Turins because every single person experiences different things. Different parts of the city have different resonances depending on who you are, if you're young, old, if you're in love, if you're heartbroken, if you're in grief. So the city actually changes. So I'm always trying to encourage a view of cities that is plural. So everyone inevitably has their own imaginary city. Sometimes that's a utopian one, sometimes it's a dystopian one. So sometimes if we can help people to realize the city that they want to live in, that's the greatest thing that we can do as architects and planners and writers.
And when people think about the city of the future, most of them think about steel and concrete cathedrals, flying objects, man-machine, deeper interaction everywhere. When you think about the city of the future, which are the first images that come to your mind at first?
Well, the first images I think are pretty much the city of today. I think that we forget that the future is older than the present. So a lot of the things we see around us will still be here in 50 years, 100 years even. Now their function will have changed and the people inhabiting these spaces will definitely have changed. But I think we have a vision of the future that's possibly come from a 1950s or 1890s view where everything's going to be different. There's going to be spacecraft and it's going to look like Dan Dare, or it's going to look like the Jetsons, or reality doesn't work that way. There are very few planned cities that have been completely successfully realized. So the vision that I have is pretty much the cities that we have now, just with different buildings on the skyline, so a lot of additions. But the things that will change, I think, are things like transport, work, whether people have houses. So I think the shell, I'm almost certain that Turin will resemble the city that it resembles now in 100 years' time. And it would be magnificent if the citizens of the city, who know the city best, have some input into what that city becomes. But I think it's good to remember, it's always good to hark back to the past and remember that the future is older than the present. We should preserve what's great rather than demolishing it and replacing it with speculative things. But when the opportunity arises, and there should be no space in a city that's wasted. So we should have grand projects, but we should also have things like letting the environment come in to cities. So if there's wasted space, you don't have to fill it with a shopping mall. You can just let nature take over and have it as a nature reserve. I see a lot of spaces around town where I just think this place should be allowed to bloom, and there should be lots of greenery and places that people can take their kids and places that older people can go. The future will look like the present. I mean, William Gibson has a beautiful quote that says, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. So the traces are already here, it's just finding those threads and following them.
There are several urban utopias that are strictly personal, linked to unique perspectives of architects, urbanists and planners. In reality, they seem to be a snapshot of a social, political and economic status quo. And how can we pass from personal to collective dreams, in your opinion? And then, is there a recipe, a way for bottom-up requests?
I think we need to always hang on to the personal element. So the collective is extremely important. Obviously, cities are huge conglomerations of people. But we always have to have the personal touch. We always have to have it come down to what does this mean for an individual citizen, and what does this mean for someone who's older, someone who's younger, someone who's gay, someone who's an immigrant who's just arrived, someone who's been here, their family's been here for hundreds of years. So I think where planned cities go wrong is that they lose the personal, they lose the human scale. Mm-hmm. So we see a lot of designs, Le Corbusier's designs, a lot of planned cities that are magnificent looking on blueprints and renderings. They look great from a helicopter, but as I said before, we don't live in helicopters, so everything needs to work on a ground level. So I think it's possible to have collective projects, to have huge projects. We forget that sometimes planned cities can work. Paris is a great example. Everyone forgets that Paris is a planned city, and when Paris came into being, people like the poet Baudelaire were saying this is terrible, this is a disastrous thing. When the Eiffel Tower was erected, everyone hated it. Now, we totally forget that now. But retaining the space for humans within these huge grand narratives and these huge grand projects. Paris is a good example because it's a planned city. You can see the radial structure of it, you can see the boulevards and everything. But where Paris had a dynamism and had a life force was between the cracks. It was the places that had been left out of the plans, the places that you had room to breathe, room to imagine. So it was Montparnasse, Montmartre, the Latin Quarter, the places where the artists went, the working class people went, the immigrants went, and they fueled the city. So I think provided that cities allow that room for people to dream and people to live and be able to afford to live, then there's a hope for every city, really. It's when those spaces are closed down and shut down, and that's a great danger, I think, with smart cities, is losing those spaces that are technically inefficient but are actually extremely creative.
how can we live in our cities trying to get a better comprehension of them in order to know and use them better?
Yeah. One of the things that really matters in cities is the past and memory and narrative and storytelling. Now, it seems like an indulgence. It seems like something that people like me say, oh, you can walk around and the street names tell us things and the buildings tell us things and the stories of what happened. So in Britain they have a name for it called psychogeography, and it's a French idea originally. You walk around the streets and the history is somehow immersed in the stones, and it's in the landscape, and you can walk around and sort of resurrect ghosts from the past. Now, that can be seen as a very frivolous kind of artistic conceit, but really it points at one of the true essences of cities, which is cities have to tell us stories. They have to, for us to have a sense of belonging, our streets have to have meanings, and meanings usually come through stories and narrative and history, and the ability to create our own stories in these streets. If we're living in a place that's full of concrete tower blocks, that has no character, that's completely brand new and it's demolished everything that's come before, then it's very difficult to get a sense of place and a sense of memory. And that's what we need to think to have, to actually have an investment in a city. It has to mean something to you, and you have to have the space to create your own stories. So I like to think, before I came to Turin, I had an idea of the place from culture. So I knew that Calvino was here, I knew that Primo Levi was buried here, I knew that Nietzsche went crazy here. And those stories gave the city a real sense of resonance when I came here. And when I was here walking around, I realized it's got all these other stories. And people are actually creating stories right now. The people around us are creating stories that in 50 years' time, people will be looking back and saying, that was an amazing time, or that person was doing this fantastic work. So I think stories are essential. The stories from the past and the stories that we're actually creating right now as we speak.
Which are the most important threats for contemporary cities? Floods, climate change, waste. And which ones the best hopes?
They're all factors that we need to think about. They're constant. Cities are networks. So there are infinite amount of processes going on in cities. We tend to think of them as very static places that people live and the buildings are everything. But cities are really entities that exist in terms of energy, in terms of time, in terms of all sorts of logistics. We just don't see the mechanics. So we don't see the pipes, we don't see the energy. You know, this, I mean, if you wanted to give a true representation of a city, it would have to extend far beyond the city boundaries. So you would need to include the container ships that bring all the stuff that goes into the shops. You would need to see where the waste goes, see where the electricity comes from, where the water comes from. I guarantee there's a reservoir somewhere nearby that is essential to this city, and the waste will go somewhere else. So all of these factors are essential. Now, we tend to think that a few beautiful skyscrapers on the horizon is what cities should aspire to. And while they have their place, we need to have a dynamic system of networks and processes. So that's the one good thing about smart cities, that people are thinking about the city as a kind of a series of interlinking networks. Climate change is a huge thing. And most cities in the world are built on the coast. A lot of countries that I've spent time in, places like places like the Netherlands, places like Bangladesh, Cambodia, are actually on sea level or below sea level. So these places are going to get hit the minute the sea rises start to really happen. We're already seeing freak weather patterns with fires in Australia, the hurricanes in America, there's droughts. Water is already becoming a huge issue. They think that there's part of the dynamo to the incredibly destructive Syrian civil war was due to water resources. So we're already seeing the climate change. Now I gravitate towards studios and architects who are embracing the change, not seeing it as a positive, because it definitely is not a positive, but at least accepting that it's happening. And I see a lot of denial. I see a lot of people doing very fanciful projects where they say, oh, well, there's no plan B, so they project it onto the Eiffel Tower. There is no plan B about climate change at the time of the Paris Accords. And my thinking is, there should be a plan B, and there should be a plan C and D and E. We're going to need all the plans we can get, because it's going to affect every city in a different way. Some cities are going to get hit by weather, other cities are going to be inundated by migrants from other places. So it's all coming. So I trust people who accept that the water and the change is coming, and not the people who deny that it's ever going to happen and bury their head in the sand.
And which will be the factors that will affect to a greater extent, shape and content of cities in the future? Technological, environmental, socio-political, maybe?
They're all going to be factors. I mean, at the heart of all of those has to be the social and the personal. I think that's at the root. So all the factors, the technological, you've got things like, there's going to be massive changes through artificial intelligence, automation, nanotechnology. There's conceivably a case in 50 years or 100 years where there's going to be a real shortage of jobs, because robots are going to be doing a lot of the work, and the robots are going to have an intelligence that is unimaginable to us right now. We're also going to have things like genetic modification, nanotechnology, even nano-architecture, where the buildings can change and the skyline can actually be modular, which we don't have now. So all these factors are coming. The politics is always there. But if these factors don't have the personal focus, if they're driven by commercial concerns, if they're driven by sort of technocratic, let's see what we can do, it always has to come back to, what does this mean for actual people? What does this mean for the people who live there? And my emphasis is always, look at a project, look at something exciting that's coming. There's lots of exciting things in technology that are on their way. And our first question should be, how is this going to go wrong? What is going to go wrong? How could someone abuse this for whatever purpose, profit or any other purpose, control, repression, and try and mitigate that before it happens? So it always comes back to, I always think of a single person facing this. What does that mean in 50 years when we have no privacy, when we have no jobs, when we have nowhere to live, but we have this beautiful utopia all around us? What does it mean to be left out of that?
Poorer people will repeat our mistakes, or will they propose new visions of progress, in your opinion?
It will differ from place to place. I think that I'd like to be an idealist. I'd like people who make cities function, the people who operate our transport systems, who work in our shops, our restaurants, our bars, the people who make all the mechanics work are working people. Now, they tend to be at the bottom of the list of priorities, which to me seems crazy, because they are essential. They make cities function. So their concerns should be, I would put it at the highest priority. Whether they can be brought together and articulate their concerns and desires, there are a lot of forces against them. It's going to differ from country to country. It's going to differ from city to city. I'd like to be hopeful. I'm actually very skeptical. As much as I give talks about future cities and think about future cities all day long, I'm an extremely skeptical person. And the things I want to happen are unfortunately not the things that are likely to happen. But I think it will get to the case, in some places I already see it, where the system cannot hold out any longer. Something has to change. I live in London. London is now so unaffordable that I don't know how anyone who's working class can live there. So I don't know how the people who work in our pubs and clubs and restaurants, how do they survive? Because The property is so expensive, the rent is so expensive. Something has to give. And I'm not expecting any revolutions all of a sudden, but I am expecting people to reach a point where change will happen, because change has to happen.
Non-lieu, junk spaces, senseless spaces, which are the features of a meaningful, constructive, quality space, public or private, in your opinion?
The junk space is interesting. So junk space is a term I think that Rem Koolhaas came up with to describe a situation where you see it in airports a lot. So you have a space that is quite impressive, and it's very clean, and it's open, and it's got these huge monumental structures, and it's filled with all the same shops, and it feels like everywhere, and it feels like nowhere. It feels like you could be anywhere in the world. There's no sense of local heritage or customs. There's no sense of the vernacular. So the thing I always try and encourage is make architecture and make urban space as vernacular as possible. Link it to, every place is unique. If we can link it to the place, if we can borrow, incorporate architectural styles that have been used locally, materials that are used locally, there's a real danger. If we don't do that, we'll end up with a situation where every city looks the same. They've all got the same high street, they've all got the same shops, they've all got the same architecture, all this parametric architecture that looks very impressive but really belongs nowhere. Now I have watched in the last 10 or 20 years these liminal spaces spread from airports into cities. So now they're coming into places where we live, where we work. They should be kept. There's a reason why they were kept outside cities, on the outskirts, and they should be quarantined there. They don't belong. There's no sense of, if you go to a plaza and it's commercialized and it's privatized without realizing it, and you sit down in certain parts of London, you have to buy something to sit there. If you sit there too long, a security guard will come and ask you to leave. You're constantly watched by CCTV. This is not a place where anyone can find any solace or meaning or hope, really. So although they look beautiful, we always have to delve and try and think about what does it actually mean. There were times where public parks did not exist. Someone's utopian dreams worked to give us those public spaces, and we should defend them at all costs. We should remember that they're actually a very radical idea, and we will miss them when they go.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Darran.
Thank you.